always found it interesting that not a lot of people would hang around with him socially that much, and definitely you never saw anybody riding with him. You know, a lot of times people would buddy up and share rental cars and maybe hotels even, and he got that kind of nickname, the Lone Wolf, because he was a lone wolf, and he was well respected. At one point during my time there in the World Wrestling Federation, I was getting very frustrated, and I remember it was in a bar because he was sitting at a table and all the boys were just kind of spread throughout the bar, and I was really frustrated with the Clique and Shawn Michaels and the power that they had in the company at the time. And I just remember going to Bret Hart and saying, man, listen, I'm wore out with this. It's driving me crazy. I need some guidance. If you could kind of give me some advice. And Bret said, why don't you come ride with me? And I was like, wow, I'll be riding with the champ, you know? So I started riding with Bret for quite a while after that. And I always thought he had my best interest at heart. But looking back later on, I kind of think that he kind of manipulated me and wound me up a little bit in certain situations where I probably wouldn't have done things. Like, I remember he was the first person to ever tell me to refuse to do a job. And the first job, that first time that happened, it happened to be the ringmaster in his debut. They wanted me to work with him and go under to Steve Austin. And my contract was about up, and it was to the point where they weren't even putting me on TV hardly at all. And I would leave my gear out in the car because I said, I'm not working, because I had not worked for so long on TV. They kept me off TV. And then one night, last minute, they said, we need you to work a match. After they had already done the production meeting, everything was already up. The last second, they changed their mind and said, they're going to put Duke in with the new guy, Steve Austin, the ringmaster. And so I went out and got my bag, my gear, and I brought it in the locker room. I sat down next to Bret, and I'm still just fuming. You know, they hadn't been using me at all on TV, and now when they do it once again, they want me to do a job for one of the new guys they're bringing in. And he just looked at me and he goes, I wouldn't do it. I refuse. And I'm sitting here next to the World Wrestling Federation champion, and he's telling me, don't do it, refuse to do it. I'm thinking, man, this must be the way to go. This is probably gonna be a great business maneuver. So what happened was, I went in. Droese was in an office at that time, and he just happened to be in there alone. And I went in and sat down, and I must have looked like I was going insane, because I sat down and I just remember sitting in front of him going, what do I got to do, man? What do I got to do? You know, I just kept saying that, and his eyes got really big, Bruce Pritchard. His eyes got really big, and I think he got kind of worried. And he's like, don't worry, I'm going to talk to Vince, don't worry. I think he was scared I was about to go postal on him or something. And they said, you don't have to do this match tonight, is what Bruce said. So I come out of that office, and I told Bret, they said I don't have to do it. And Fatu was sitting there, and he heard what we were talking about, and he goes, you need to go talk to Steve Austin and tell him what's going on and why. And that was a good piece of advice. And I did. I went up to Steve and I said, listen, he came up to me actually, he goes, oh, here we're working together. And I said, no, actually we're not. He goes, really? And I said, yeah, man, listen, these guys have been killing me for a long time, keeping me off TV, and tonight I decided to refuse to do a match. And it is nothing against you personally. This is what I'm telling Steve Austin. It's nothing against you personally. But I felt like I finally had to kind of take a stand. And he said, man, I understand, no problem. And later on after that, me and Steve were good buddies. We rode around a lot on the road. But that was the situation, and that was the first time Bret got me to refuse. And of course, it was at the end of my initial contract too, which is important because they were more willing to let me refuse. I'll tell you the second time Bret told me to refuse to do a job. It was at the pay-per-view match with me and Triple H. And I'll never forget that as that was developing and they did the whole deal where he cut my hair, it was because I wanted to change my appearance and I wanted to turn heel. And I was asking them for that. And what they decided, Jim Ross came up with the idea that they should let Triple H cut my hair as part of the angle. And I agreed to it. I said, that's fine as long as you let me get some kind of revenge in the end. I know I'm not going to beat him. I didn't say this, but it was because he was in the clique. I knew I wasn't going to beat him because he's in the clique. But as long as I got some kind of revenge in the end. And they said, yeah, absolutely. Well, then by the time we got to the night before, I remember, because there was no cell phones really then, we were at a restaurant or something, and somebody said, you need to call Jerry Briscoe. Pretty sure it was Briscoe. You need to call Briscoe. And I called him, and he informed me of the finish, and there wasn't any revenge or anything. It was just like, okay, it's a fuck finish. You're gonna get hit with the lid and pinned 1, 2, 3. And I was just like, that isn't exactly what we talked about. So I go and talk to Bret Hart about it, and I'm like, this isn't what we talked about. What do you think? He goes, I'd refuse to do it. He said it again. He go, I'd refuse to do it. I go, they had just renewed my contract. So my position wasn't as good now. I didn't have a bargaining position because I couldn't leave because I was in for another year. First 2-year contract and then rolled over 1 year at a time. Anyway, he said, you should refuse to do it. I was like, I don't know, man. And he goes, you know what I think you should do? You should talk to Vince. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, okay. We were in the town of the pay-per-view, all in the hotel, all the TV people were there, and he goes, here's Vince's room number. He gave me his room number, and he said, call Vince. And I was so whacked out of my brain, I thought that was a good idea. So I called Vince at 8 a.m. the morning of the pay-per-view, and I said, Vince, I want to talk to you about the match. He said, I'm eating breakfast right now. Can I call you after? And I said, yeah, and I gave him my room number. Anyway, he called me back. He's like, what's going on, pal? And I said, Vince, I got the finish from Jerry last night, and it's not what we talked about. And I went into the whole thing, and I said, I don't think it's not a good idea, And Vince, his whole demeanor changed immediately. Okay. He said, it's not like we're working on a 3 to 6 month run for Duke the Dumpster to become the World Wrestling Federation champion. Now, I knew that was the case, obviously, but it kind of stung when he said it. And the next thing he said was, what you need to do is just show up at the pay-per-view like you always do, with a smile on your face, and do your job. And that was a very bitter pill to swallow, but I did. I kind of smiled like a smartass when I saw him at the TV, but that's what I did. I showed up and just did it the way they said do it. I didn't refuse. And of course, I told Bret, I said I couldn't refuse because I just started a new contract and, I'd be in a breach of contract. And he goes, okay, well, you need to take a step back and draw a new line in the sand. That was what he said. Draw a new line in the sand. Like Duke the Dumpster had such a bargaining position. So, yeah, that was the second occurrence. And that wasn't even the worst one. That wasn't even the worst.
At this point, you got to tell us the worst one.
The worst one. After the Triple H deal, and I was wanting to turn heel, Bret, I don't think we were riding together so much anymore. But I was still trying to take advice from him because I still couldn't recognize the fact that he was winding me up. Of course, I was messed up most of the time anyway, but at that point. But at one point we were talking about how I could become a heel. And Bret's opinion was that I needed to come up with 3 opponents, 1, 2, 3, that I could beat. 3 baby faces. 1, 2, 3, on my way to becoming a strong heel. That's kind of how the buildup would work. I said, that sounds great, you know. I think I said Bob Holly, Fatu, and somebody else. I don't know. Those were my 3 people. Sorry, guys. But anyway, Bret then says, you know what I think you should do? He said, I think you should call Vince and talk to him about it. So what he then did next, Bret Hart did, he gave me Vince's home phone number and said, you should call Vince at home and tell him your ideas.
You didn't learn from the first.
Oh! No, brother, I was so out there. I mean, I was on a lot of painkillers, man, and drinking a lot of booze at night. But yeah, that sounded like a good idea for some reason. I always make the joke, his housekeeper was a very nice person, but and Vince was very nice to me too when he spoke to me at home. I called him a few times. He was always nice to me about it, but it wasn't a good idea because after that point, things noticeably changed, like at TV tapings. You know, you think I wasn't getting booked on shows before. Now it was every new guy that came in, Duke was the first one that, you know, did the honors for him, did the job. TL, Hopper, Mankind, all these guys came in after. And I was like one of the first guys that they fed to him. So I realized my position was not good at that point.